Vladimir Putin has thrown a stone into an unstable pond. The implications of his actions in Ukraine are not just confined to the Slavic states or even Europe. The ripples are hitting shores across the globe. Here at Loughborough, Dr Ali Bilgic is a reader in international relations and security with a focus on the Middle East. And I've invited him here today to talk about Middle Eastern mercenaries, nuclear deals with Iran, and how Saudi Arabia is poised to take advantage of reduced Russian fuel imports. Right, welcome to the podcast, Ali. Thanks for joining us. If you could start off, just give us a little bit of background about yourself, who you are and what you do. That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Pete. My name is Ali Bilgic. I am a reader in international relations and security. And for around 10 years now, I've been working on Middle East politics, particularly geopolitical relations in the Middle Eastern countries and the countries beyond the Middle East.
Excellent. And so today, I think what we'll do, we'll start talking about Iran and the nuclear deal, because that seems to have reared its head again in light of Ukraine. Could you explain a little bit of the background?
Sure. Iran nuclear deal was done in 2015 when Obama was president, and it was a unique moment in history. It took years of negotiations, secret negotiations at the beginning, including some European powers, including United Kingdom and Russia. The deal was about in return of removing some sanctions, Iran agreed to produce some uranium for use of energy instead of for producing nuclear weapons. However, Trump withdrew from agreement, and the whole deal collapsed. When Biden became president in 2021, in January 2021, Biden immediately went back to deal. However, this time Iran demanded new assurances from United States that United States would never actually withdraw from the deal. Meanwhile, some things changed in Iran as well in domestic politics. More hardliner president was elected last summer as well. So the negotiations became a bit tense recently, and in this context, the Ukraine war started, and the sanctions were introduced. It was an important moment because that Friday, United States made some demands both to Russia and Iran, saying that the sanctions would cover Russia-Iran economic relationships, and based on those demands, Russia withdrew. The negotiations collapsed in that moment, and that weekend, Iran bombed the construction site of U.S. consulate in northern Iraq. And when this was happening, Iranian foreign minister visited Moscow, and they made a common statement against the United States. When UK finally negotiated the free of two British Iranian nationals, one of them was Nazanin, United States gave written assurances to Russia that the sanctions would not cover Iran-Russia trade relations, and Russia is now back to table, and the negotiations basically have restarted, and probably in a few days' time we might even hear something positive about the deal, because right now, because of the sanctions and because of the determination of the Western powers not to use Russian oil and gas, Iranian oil becomes very, very, very strategically important. So it is important that that deal is done. It is important, and of course that gives Iran an immense power over Western states. But we shouldn't make any mistake here. Just because this deal is happening, just because Western states, particularly European states, start buying more Iranian oil, this doesn't mean that Iran would not take any action on the side of Russia. It will. Iran will act, particularly in the Middle East, on the Russian interests.
Okay, and so how do you see the deal playing out then? I mean, you mentioned that there's a chance that it will actually go forward and something positive will happen, but at what cost could that be? Because, like as you say, Iran holds all the trump cards, doesn't it? How do you imagine it playing out?
Yeah, Iran doesn't hold all good cards here because Iran is in a terrible economic crisis right now. The economy is in tatters in Iran. Sanctions seriously delimit the economic potential of the country. There's so much poverty. Iran needs international sanctions removed completely to be part of global financial system and trade system. So that's the Western Trump card here, and they are going to use it. So when this deal is done, when the economic relationships intensify between the Western countries, including United States and Iran, there are two ways that this can play out. One way is that because Iran becomes a crucial economic partner for some Western countries in oil and other exports, Iran would might have a moderating influence over Russia. So that would be the positive side of it. But the other potential here, the play out, particularly in the Middle Eastern case, is that because Iran is in power competition with Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, and Iran is very determined to expand this influence at the expense of Saudi Arabia by using its proxies such as Lebanese Hezbollah and other Shia forces in the Middle East. And given that Saudi Arabia is a close ally of United States and United Kingdom, Iran will continue to rely on Russian military and economic support when it comes to its objectives in the Middle East, which make this particular scenario makes the first scenario less likely.
Yeah.
In spite of all the good economic relations, because Tehran knows that the West needs its oil, but on the other hand, Tehran also knows that it has significant influence already in the Middle East. In order to maintain and expand this influence, it needs Russia.
Okay. And you mentioned Saudi Arabia there, and Iran wanting to sort of grow its influence, but that's what's happening in Saudi Arabia now, isn't it? And
Saudi Arabia, interesting here because it has been a long-term ally of the Western countries, particularly United States. It is a conservative power. However, with the Biden administration particularly, some moves of the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, which is actual de facto ruler of the country, the Western states and the United States, particularly the Biden administration, hasn't received these activities positively, such as the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul, in Saudi embassy. So Biden administration put a distance before the Ukraine war between Saudi Arabia and United States. That includes many Western powers as well. For example, Sweden stopped selling weapons to Saudi Arabia because of all this new geopolitical structure. However, as we just saw last week, because the Western states, European Union, UK, and United States stopped buying this oil from Russia, they need alternative areas like Iran. And Saudi Arabian oil again becomes crucial, which gives, just like Iran, immense power over Saudi Arabia.
Could there be a quite sort of strange fallout from this, where there is more stability then in the Middle East because everyone's looking there for oil, and there might have to be more communication there and better relations? Could that be something positive out of this?
I wish I could say that.
I know it's a big ask.
I wish I could say that. I think diplomacy and communication between some Middle Eastern powers and Western states would increase, and there will be some positive moves there for sure. However, within the Middle East, because of this regional power competition between Saudi Arabia and Iran, their proxies in different countries, certain regimes supporting both sides differently. But also, there is a big Israel issue over that, big Israel question, who Israel for a long time considered many Arab states as existential threats to ISIS's presence. So we shouldn't forget that. We shouldn't forget that either. So as Saudi Arabia and Iran had become quite important economic natural resource markets for the West, Israel might not like this kind of positive relationship between particularly Iran and the West, because in 2015, for example, when the Iranian deal first signed, Israel was pretty much the only country that criticized the West and making reference to 1938 Munich Agreement that to appease Hitler, Czechoslovakia was divided between. So Israel was not happy about this deal, but I doubt that Israel would criticize the deal right now, given the Ukraine war and what's happening there. But it doesn't mean that Israel would allow or would be happy deep relationship between Iran and some Western powers, because destruction of Israel completely is one of the foreign policy objectives of Islamic Republic of Iran since 1979. Israel would not tolerate that.
And Israel's relationship would become stronger with the US as well, or has become stronger because of this. So how does that tangle this web even further?
This is it is really a big mess and entanglement here. We are looking at it seriously. When Trump was president, Benjamin Netanyahu was the prime minister of Israel for a long time, and Benjamin Netanyahu was quite a radical figure in Israeli right. And Trump and Netanyahu were pretty much like-minded leaders, and they went along very well. And Trump administration even managed to come up with this botched peace plan between Israel and some Middle Eastern states that didn't go very well, naturally. And in that moment, Trump administration decided to move American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, if you remember, and it created a big backlash, not only in Palestine, from Palestinians and different Arab states, but from Europe as well. UK did not approve that movement either. The thing is, interestingly, since Biden has been president since January 2021, embassy is still in Jerusalem. He hasn't made any move to move back to that embassy to Tel Aviv. Yes, Israeli-American relations will be quite intense in the next few decades, apparently. That's normal. But we shouldn't also forget that Israel has quite interesting and deep military relations with Russia. It sells weapons to Russia as well. Israel is a big arm exporter, defense exporter. It is one of the reasons Israel, like Turkey, has been one of the tried to be moderator in this conflict, because these kind of countries such as Israel and Turkey, close to both sides, they have a lot to lose if the relationship collapses economically, but also strategically. Because of the close relationship with Russia, because Russia and Iran are also allies in Israel, in Middle East, Israel might actually use Russian influence on Iran in its geopolitical situation in Middle East. So cutting that relationship with Russia for Israel is not the optimum outcome of this relationship. But if this tension between Russia and the United States continues to grow, and this is very, very likely countries like Turkey and Russia may not have many options here, choices here, and they need to choose sides very, very soon. So they need to choose sides here, and it is not really a surprising move. A few weeks ago, just when this war is happening in Ukraine, Israel and Turkey relaunched their relationship, revive their relationship in a very positive term. Since a little bit of background here, I think might be helpful
Absolutely.
for our audience here. During the Cold War, Israel being an important strategic partner of the United States and Turkey as a NATO member were two important allies of Western powers in the Middle East, and they worked together. Their relationship were very positive, and this continued in the post-Cold War era as well for a long time. However, in late 2000s, Turkey adopted a different foreign policy to expand its sphere of influence in the Middle East. And in order to expand its influence in the Middle East, it needed Arab support. And if you want to become popular in the Middle East, there is one thing that generally works is to target Israel. Okay.
Yeah.
And in this 2009 World Economic Summit in Davos, Erdogan, for example, then Prime Minister, stormed out from the meeting, criticizing Israel, which actually gained massive popularity to Erdogan himself. And then in 2010, this Mavi Marmara crisis happened between Israel and Turkey. The explanation of this is an 8-ship departed from Istanbul, carrying aid to Gaza, which was in the Mediterranean coast, and but under the blockade of Israeli Navy. So Israel warned Turkey to not allow to depart this ship, because we will not allow that ship to pass to blockade. And Israel didn't. Israeli forces attacked the ship and killed actually some people on the ship. So that was a massive crisis, but increased Turkey's popularity in the Middle East. So that was the collapse of the relationship. Basically, since then, relationship didn't go very well. However, out of nothing, and of course, not Benjamin Netanyahu not being the prime minister of Israel might have helped here as well. Turkey and Israel came together around 10 days ago, two weeks ago, and I watched recently a video prepared by the communication Directorate of Communication of Turkish Presidency, and the video is a 5 minutes long video, pretty much, and the video was talking about a deep historical relationship between Turkey and Israel, and also mentioned how Ottoman Empire opened its arms to the Jews who were persecuted in Spain in the 15th century, and that was true. Ottoman Empire really opened its borders to become a refuge for the Jews persecuted in Europe for a long time. During the Second World War, Turkey helped lots of Jews from Europe as well. So referring back to this historical instances, and then referring back to Cold War, deep relationship. And at some point in the video, it says, it is now time to rebuild relationship between two capitals, which is quite interesting because Turkey doesn't recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So I'm wondering, for example, nowadays, if Turkey is also about to make some moves here when it comes to recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That would be quite explosive, of course. But if the situation in Ukraine goes worse, and it will go worse, and the tension will increase between the West, NATO countries, and Russia, Turkey might need to make certain moves in the Middle East to ensure that it is part of the NATO alliance, Western alliance. And of course, Turkey will ask important economic aid from United States. And actually, there were negotiations last week about this as well between Turkey and United States, and that relationship would be more stronger between Israel and Turkey, and basically they would go back, both countries go back to their Cold War positions in the Middle East as the supporter of the Western position in the new front, in the new Cold War in the Middle East.
Excellent. Okay. Now the last thing I wanted to ask you about, which is something that we were discussing before, which is quite sort of surprising, was this Russia's use of mercenaries now in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And they seem to have, the way you were describing it to me, it sounded like they had franchised out this package of mercenaries, which they've spread out throughout in the Middle East and other places. And can you tell me a little bit about that, please, and how that's affecting the Ukraine war?
Sure. Probably our audience have recently heard a lot about we need to do more in terms of sanctions certain oligarchs in Russia because they support Putin. But there's not much information regarding the nature of this support between oligarchs and the Kremlin Putin regime in Russia. And that relationship is very much about these mercenaries, this private security companies, so-called private, such as Wagner Group. So I think it is important to explain the model that Russia built in the last few decades, built in the Middle East, and now being exported to different parts of the world, including Sub-Saharan Africa as well. So that model is this. There is a triangle. On the one side on the one corner of the triangle, there is Kremlin, Putin, making strategic decisions based on the national interest of Russia, that in the way that Putin identifies. But Russian army is of course mobilized for this interest most of the time, but Russian army is not the only forces being mobilized here. Russia increasingly use private security companies, mercenaries, in concert of the Russian military moves. The thing is, these private military companies are actually private, formally. They are. On paper, they are very separate. They are private companies. They are acting in concert of the Kremlin's strategic objectives, which actually allow Kremlin to disassociate itself if things go wrong, for example. However, that's the second corner of the triangle, these private security companies. The third corner is the pocket behind this. When these private military companies were sent to somewhere in different parts of the world, in Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, or Libya, the Kremlin is not paying them. Oligarchs are paying. So the oligarchs are actually, all this money were the deep pocket of the private security companies which are acting in line with the Kremlin's strategic interests. So that's the model that Russia has created and perfected in Syria, in Libya as well. Right now, because of these private military companies, Russia has access to natural resources in Libya, for example, and these natural resources sites are under the protection of these private security companies.
So how do companies like Wagner, how do they explain what they're doing? How do they justify what they're doing if it's so obviously in line with Russian interests?
Well, technically they are private companies, aren't they?
They don't have to explain themselves.
Well, they don't have to explain to whom they need to explain themselves.
No.
I mean, the thing is, when it comes to private military companies, we don't have, unlike, for example, war crimes of states. We don't have such an established international law and norms about this kind of private actors yet. And by the way, let's make one point very clear. Private military companies also work for Western states. In Iraq, for example, Blackwater, renamed as Academia later, work for United States as well. However, in their domestic legal system, these private military companies were pretty much controlled and checked. And there is a legal system, domestic legal system, that checked these companies. In the Russian case, this kind of system doesn't exist.
Right.
Okay, so they have absolutely neither internationally nor domestically any reason to explain themselves.
Yeah.
And especially when the money is flowing from the oligarchs, and Russia is gaining, the Kremlin is gaining achieving their strategic objectives, business as usual.
Yeah. And how are they being used in Ukraine then? And what is the advantage there to Putin?
Yeah, of course. As I said earlier, this kind of model first tried in Syria since 2015, and first tried in Libya and then Syria, and is perfected there. So right now, this model and the private military companies is perfected. That strategy is now has been moved to Ukraine, and now they are working there. They are doing their work there, and it is very, very likely that although now all eyes are on Ukraine, but whatever happens Ukraine, even today, let's say hostilities cease to exist in Ukraine today, there is going to be a new Cold War between Russia and the West. And this new Cold War played out in different parts of the world, particularly in Central Asia, such as also in Middle East. Proxies of proxies will fight. But another region that we really need to keep an eye on in Sub-Saharan Africa, because one important country is Sudan. Recently, after the recent political developments in Sudan regime has become very, very pro-Russian right now, and this model is now being important to Sudan as well. And in 2021, Russia signed 4 different military base construction agreements with 4 different sub-Saharan African states. And when Russia makes military moves, it goes with a package. It is not only military bases. It is also this security forces, private military companies, defense contracts, everything, technical support, training support, and everything. So we need to really, really keep an eye on Central Asia, Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa and Russian moves in the next few decades, because these were the fronts, not only Eastern Europe, these were the main fronts this new Cold War will be fought.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't America have more troops stationed in Africa than anywhere else? Is that right?
That is true. That is correct. American presence in some parts of Africa is very rich, and particularly in the post 9/11 context, when Boko Haram, for example, became a terrorist threat in sub-Saharan Africa, this kind of military influence increased in sub-Saharan Africa. But we shouldn't forget one point, and that's the part that we need to go back a bit history here. During the Cold War, Russia established deep relationships with many sub-Saharan African countries, just like they did in Middle East. It is, for example, one of the reasons today, in spite of very pro-Western position, Egypt couldn't really condemn Russia, because Russian-Egyptian relationship goes really deep since 1950s onwards. So yes, there is so much military influence of Western powers, particularly United States. Turkey is also doing a lot of work here in sub-Saharan Africa against Boko Haram, sending weapons, selling weapons, becoming an important defense exporter as well. But this deep historical relationship will probably play out in sub-Saharan Africa too. I've been following what is going on not only in the Middle East, but sub-Saharan Africa as well. What the media in those countries has been saying. If I may hear a little bit more on this. Yes, they do criticize Russian aggression, particularly the media in Ukraine, and they do reflect on the humanitarian dimension of this war a lot. But there are many issues here that they also mention, such as what they asked, where was the West when Aleppo was leveled by the Russian air forces? They make, particularly in the Middle East, they make reference to Palestine, they make references to Yemen. In sub-Saharan Africa, they make references to colonial past. They might be partners of the West as well in this new Cold War. It is possible, but I don't think Western states, including NATO countries such as Turkey, should not take any of the sub-Saharan countries or Middle Eastern countries and consider them in pocket here because of what happened in the past and some of the hypocrisies they called in Western position in some of the crises we have seen in the last 10 years.
Okay, right. Well, we seem to have moved continents, so we'll wrap it up there. Ali, thank you so much. That was really good. I think we might have a whole new something else to talk about with Africa being the new front line of the Cold War, maybe. But we'll cover that another time. Thank you again, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening or watching if you're on YouTube. This show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other platforms. I hope you join us again.